This is a excerpt from Behind the Scenes or 30 Years a Slave and 4 Years in the White House by Elizabeth Keckley. The holidays passed, and before the close of January, the war was discussed in Mr. Davis's family as an event certain to happen in the future. Mrs. Davis warmly attached to Washington, and I often heard her say that she disliked the idea of breaking up old associations and going south to suffer from trouble and deprivation. One day, while discussing the question in my presence with one of her intimate friends, she exclaimed, "I would rather remain in Washington and be kicked out than go south and be Mrs. President." Her friend expressed surprise at the remark, and Mrs. Davis insisted that the opinion was an honest one. While addressing her one day, she said to me, "Lizzie, you are so very handy that I should like to take you to the South with me." "When do you go south, Mrs. Davis?" I inquired. "Oh, I cannot tell just now, but it will be soon. You know there is going to be a war, Lizzie." "No, but I tell you yes." "Who will go to war?" I asked. "The North and South," was her ready reply. "The Southern people will not submit to the humiliating demands of the abolition party. They will fight first." "And which do you think will whip?" "The South, of course. The South is impulsive, is in earnest, and the Southern soldiers will fight to conquer. The North will yield when it sees the South is in earnest, rather than engage in a long and bloody war." "But, Mrs. Davis, are you certain that there will be war?" "Certain, I know it. You better go south with me. I will take good care of you. Besides, when the war breaks out, the colored people will suffer in North. The Northern people will look upon them as the cause of the war, and I fear, in their exasperation, will be inclined to treat you harshly. Then I may come back to Washington in a few months and live in the White House. The Southern people talk of choosing Mr. Davis for their president. In fact, it may be considered settled that he will be their president. As soon as we go south and secede from the other states, we will raise an army and march on Washington, and then I shall live in the White House." I was bewildered with what I heard. I had served Mrs. Davis faithfully, and she had learned to place the greatest confidence in me. At first, I was almost tempted to go south with her, for her reasoning seemed plausible. At the time, the conversation was closed, with my promise to consider the question. I thought over the question much, and more I thought, the less inclined I felt to accept the proposition so kindly made by Mrs. Davis. I knew the North to be strong, and believed that the people would fight for the flag that they pretended to venerate so highly. The Republican Party had just emerged from a heated campaign. Flushed with victory, I could not think that the host composing the party would quietly yield all they had gained in the presidential canvass. A show of war from the South, I felt, would lead to actual war in the North, and with the two sections bitterly arrayed against each other, I preferred to cast my lot amongst the people of the North. I parted with Mrs. Davis kindly, half promising to join her in the South if further deliberation would induce me to change my views. A few weeks before she left Washington, I made two chintz wrappers for her. She said that she must give up expensive dressing for a while, and that she, with the Southern people, now that war was imminent, must learn to practice lessons of economy. She left some fine needlework in my hands, which I finished and forwarded to her at Montgomery, Alabama, in the month of June, through the assistance of Mrs. Emory, one of her oldest and best friends. Since bidding them goodbye at Washington early in the year 1860, I have never met any of the Davis family. Years of excitement, years of bloodshed, and hundreds of thousands of graves intervene between months I spent in the family and now. The years have brought many changes, and in view of these terrible changes, even I, who was once a slave, who have been punished with the cruel lash, who have experienced the heart and soul tortures of a slave's life, can say to Mr. Jefferson Davis, "Peace! You have suffered. Go in peace."